Damn, you're ugly. You want me to fix that face with a punch?
Now, come on.
Oh, I didn't see that coming.
You won't see.
911, what's your emergency?
I need help fast, Ray. The fighter's not waking up.
Marcus Rivera adjusted his championship belt as he surveyed the crowded boxing gym, his piercing eyes scanning the room for his next target. The Golden Gloves Academy buzzed with activity as evening training sessions wound down, and Marcus enjoyed these moments when parents arrived to collect their children. It gave him opportunities to remind everyone exactly who ran this place. Sarah Martinez pushed through the heavy metal doors, her tired eyes immediately searching for her 15-year-old son, Danny. The familiar smell of leather and sweat filled her nostrils as she spotted him near the heavy bags, practicing combinations with two other teens. "Danny, let's wrap up," she called softly, settling onto a worn bench near the observation area. At 42, Sarah had long ago stopped caring about appearances. Her faded jeans and simple cotton sweater told the story of someone who prioritized function over fashion. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her face bore the gentle lines of someone who'd learned that true strength came from within. Marcus finished barking instructions at a group of amateur fighters, his booming voice echoing off the concrete walls. His regional championship trophy gleamed from its place of honor on the wall, and he never missed an opportunity to remind people of his achievements. "Keep your guard up, Williams. My grandmother punched harder than that," he sneered at a struggling teenager. The other fighters exchanged nervous glances, their respect tinged with fear. Sarah watched quietly, noting Marcus's technique. Solid fundamentals, good power, but his arrogance was unmistakable. She'd encountered his type before in her previous life, talented enough to dominate local competition, successful enough to believe their own hype. "Coach Rivera really pushes them hard," whispered one mother to another nearby. "But Danny's improved so much since starting here." "He certainly commands respect," the other replied, though her tone suggested she found his methods questionable. 20 minutes later, Danny jogged over, his face flushed from training. "Ready, Mom? Just need to grab my gear." "Of course, sweetheart. How was today?" "Good. Coach showed us some new defensive moves. He thinks I might be ready for my first amateur bout next month." Pride swelled in Sarah's chest. Danny had struggled with bullies at school before discovering boxing, and watching him gain confidence made every sacrifice worthwhile. As they gathered his equipment, Marcus's voice cut through the ambient noise. "Hold up, everyone. Before we close tonight, who wants to see something educational?" The gym fell silent, all attention turning toward the coach. Sarah felt an uncomfortable tension building in her stomach. Marcus's gaze swept the room before settling on her, a predatory smile spreading across his weathered features. "You know what? I think we need a reality check about the difference between trained fighters and regular folks." Several boxers shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't part of their usual routine. "Mom, let's just leave," Danny whispered, tugging on her sleeve. But Marcus wasn't finished. He strode across the canvas-covered floor with exaggerated confidence, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly tense atmosphere. Other parents looked around nervously, uncertain whether this was planned instruction or something more troubling. Sarah stood slowly, her maternal instincts alerting her to danger. Whatever Marcus had planned, she sensed it wouldn't end well. Marcus stopped directly in front of Sarah, his 6'2" frame towering over her modest 5'6" stature. The entire gym had gone eerily quiet. Even the teenagers who'd been joking moments before now watched with uncomfortable silence. "Ma'am," Marcus said loudly, ensuring everyone could hear, "I don't believe we've been introduced. You're Danny's mom, correct?" "That's right," Sarah replied evenly, her voice steady despite the tension crackling through the air. Marcus's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Well, since you're here watching us train, I was wondering if you've ever been curious about real boxing yourself." Sarah felt Danny's hand slip into hers, his palm damp with nervous sweat. "Not really," she answered honestly. "Oh, come on," Marcus continued, his tone becoming more theatrical as he played to his audience. "I bet you've seen those movies thinking you could throw a punch like that, right? Most people do." Nervous laughter rippled through the room. Sarah noticed several parents looking away, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this was heading. "Actually, I don't really watch boxing movies," Sarah said, maintaining her composure. "We should probably get home. Danny has schoolwork." But Marcus wasn't finished with his performance. He took another step closer, his voice dropping just enough to seem conversational while still carrying throughout the gym. "You know what? I've got a better idea. How about a little demonstration? Nothing serious, just a quick sparring session to show everyone the difference between real training and, well, wishful thinking." The blood drained from Danny's face. "Coach Rivera, my mom doesn't—" "It's okay, sweetheart," Sarah interrupted softly. Though her jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly, Marcus clapped his hands together, the sharp sound making several people jump. "Excellent. Don't worry, Mrs. Martinez. I'll take it easy on you. Wouldn't want to hurt someone who's never thrown a real punch." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. Sarah could see the other boxers shifting uncomfortably, some looking ashamed of their coach's behavior, others excited by the prospect of entertainment. "This really isn't necessary," Sarah said, her voice remaining steady. "Oh, but it is," Marcus insisted, spreading his arms wide. "See, too many people think they're tough because of what they see on screen. It's important to understand the reality of real combat training versus suburban mom aerobics." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, not anger exactly, but a familiar coldness she hadn't experienced in years. "Besides," Marcus continued, now clearly enjoying himself, "what's the worst that could happen? A few gentle demonstrations, maybe a takedown or two. Consider it a free lesson in reality." Around the room, reactions were mixed. Some fighters looked mortified by their coach's behavior, while others seemed caught up in the drama. The other parents appeared torn between intervening and staying out of it. Sarah looked down at Danny, whose eyes were wide with worry and embarrassment. Then she looked back at Marcus, whose smug expression suggested he was already savoring his inevitable victory. "One condition," Sarah said quietly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what's that?" "When this is over, you apologize to your fighters for this display." Marcus's laughter echoed through the gym, sharp and mocking. "Apologize? Lady, you're going to be the one apologizing to the canvas when you hit it." Several fighters winced at their coach's cruelty, but Sarah's expression remained unchanged. She simply nodded and began removing her jacket, revealing lean, well-defined arms that spoke of years of disciplined training. "Mom," Danny whispered urgently, "you don't have to do this." Sarah squeezed her son's hand gently. "Sometimes, honey, bullies need to be reminded that strength comes in many forms." As Sarah moved toward the center of the ring, her movement suddenly transformed. The shuffling walk of a tired suburban mother melted away, replaced by the fluid, measured steps of someone who understood combat on an intimate level. Marcus, busy adjusting his gloves and playing to his audience, missed the change entirely. "All right, folks, gather around. Let's make this educational." What Marcus didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that Sarah Martinez had once been Sarah Rodriguez, two-time women's professional boxing champion. For 8 years, she dominated the welterweight division, earning the nickname Silent Thunder for her calm demeanor and devastating combinations. She'd retired suddenly at 27, not from defeat or injury, but from tragedy. Her younger sister, also a fighter, had been killed by a drunk driver while rushing to one of Sarah's title defenses. The guilt had been overwhelming. If she hadn't been competing, her sister wouldn't have been on that highway that night. Sarah had walked away from everything. The titles, the endorsements, the life she'd built. She'd moved across the country and sworn never to fight again. For 15 years, she'd kept that promise, channeling her energy into raising Danny and building a quiet life as a physical therapist. But now, watching Marcus's smug face as he explained to his fighters how real boxers handled wannabes, Sarah felt the old fire stirring. Not for glory or competition, but for something more important: respect. "You ready, Mrs. Martinez?" Marcus called out, bouncing lightly on his toes in what he probably thought was an intimidating display. Sarah centered herself in the ring, her breathing becoming deeper and more controlled. Around her, the watching crowd grew quieter, sensing something they couldn't quite identify. "Just remember," Marcus announced to his audience, "this is why we train seriously. You can't fake experience." The irony of his words wasn't lost on Sarah. She'd faced Olympic medalists, professional champions, and fighters who dedicated their entire lives to perfection. Marcus, for all his regional success, was about to learn what real experience looked like. "Any last words before we begin?" Marcus asked, his tone dripping with false courtesy. Sarah looked directly into his eyes for the first time since this ordeal began. What Marcus saw there made him take an involuntary step backward. Not fear or uncertainty, but the cold, calculating gaze of a predator who'd been playing prey. "Yes," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent gym. "You might want to remember that the most dangerous fighters are often the ones who choose not to show their skills." Marcus's confident smirk faltered slightly, but his pride wouldn't let him back down now. "All right then," Marcus said, shaking off his momentary uncertainty. "Let's get this over with." He began shadow boxing ostentatiously, throwing elaborate combinations clearly designed to intimidate. The other fighters watched with a mixture of excitement and concern, while the parents looked increasingly uncomfortable with the entire situation. Sarah, meanwhile, stood perfectly still in the center of the ring. Her breathing had become deep and rhythmic, and those few people who knew what to look for might have noticed the subtle shift in her stance, the slight lowering of her center of gravity, the way her weight had distributed evenly across both feet. "Mom, please," Danny whispered from ringside. "You don't have anything to prove." Sarah turned to her son with a gentle smile. "Sometimes, sweetheart, it's not about proving anything. It's about teaching." Marcus finished his warm-up with a flourish, throwing a series of combinations that whistled audibly through the silence. "Hope you've been saying your prayers, Mrs. Martinez. This might sting a little." Around the room, several parents exchanged worried glances. This had gone far beyond a simple demonstration. Marcus's behavior was becoming genuinely concerning. Sarah could hear the murmurs, but paid them no attention. Instead, she closed her eyes briefly, allowing muscle memory to resurface. Her body remembered everything: the countless hours of training, the precise timing of counters, the feel of an opponent's rhythm, and how to disrupt it. When she opened her eyes, something fundamental had changed. The tired suburban mom was gone, replaced by someone who moved with predatory grace. Marcus noticed the transformation and frowned. "You've been holding out on us, haven't you? Taken a few cardio boxing classes at the community center?" "Something like that," Sarah replied softly. "Well, no matter. A little weekend warrior training won't help you here." Marcus began circling her slowly, still playing to his audience. "See, folks, This is what happens when people overestimate their abilities. Real boxing isn't like the movies. Sarah remained motionless in the center, turning only her head to track his movement. To an untrained eye, she looked passive, almost defenseless. But to anyone who understood fighting, her stillness was unnerving, like a coiled spring waiting for the right moment to release. The thing about boxing, Marcus continued his lecture while circling, is that it takes years to develop real power. You can't just watch a few videos and think you're ready for the real thing. You're absolutely right, Sarah agreed, her voice carrying an odd note that made several people look at her more closely. Marcus paused his circling, clearly surprised by her agreement. Exactly. So maybe we should just call this off before... No, Sarah interrupted gently. You wanted to teach a lesson about real boxing. Let's teach one. The certainty in her voice sent a ripple of unease through the room. Even Marcus seemed to sense that something had shifted, though his pride prevented him from backing down. Fine, he said, settling into what he thought was an intimidating fighting stance. But don't say I didn't warn you. Marcus launched forward with a textbook jab-cross combination, the kind of attack he'd probably used successfully against countless amateurs. It was fast, technically sound, and delivered with the full weight of his considerable frame behind it. It never came close to landing. Sarah moved like water flowing around a stone. She slipped the jab with minimal head movement, then stepped off the center line at precisely the right moment to let the cross slice through empty air where her face had been a split second before. The movement was so subtle, so economical, that several observers weren't even sure she'd moved at all. Marcus stumbled slightly, his momentum carrying him past his intended target. His eyes widened in confusion. Those punches should have connected. He'd used that combination successfully hundreds of times before. Lucky slip, he muttered, resetting his stance. Won't happen twice. Sarah said nothing, simply returned to her centered position and waited. This time, Marcus tried a more complex combination: jab, cross, hook, uppercut. Each punch was technically proficient, thrown with the confidence of someone who'd never been seriously challenged. Each punch found nothing but air. Sarah moved like smoke, her head slipping punches by millimeters, her body swaying just out of range, with an economy of motion that was almost hypnotic to watch. She never looked rushed, never seemed off balance. It was as if she could see each attack coming seconds before Marcus himself knew what he was going to throw. Around the room, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The excited chatter had died completely, replaced by an electric tension that made everyone hold their breath. Even the youngest fighters could sense they were witnessing something extraordinary. Marcus's confidence began to crack. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he realized none of his attacks were even close to connecting. "Stand still and fight," he snarled, launching into a more aggressive series of strikes. Sarah continued her ethereal dance, avoiding each technique with minimal effort. But now something else was happening. She was moving closer with each evasion, subtly closing the distance while Marcus exhausted himself, throwing increasingly desperate attacks. "What's she doing?" whispered one of the teenage fighters. "She's making him tired," observed another more perceptively. Marcus threw a wild overhand right, putting everything he had behind it. Sarah ducked under it smoothly and for the first time touched him. Just a light tap on his exposed ribs as he spun past her. The touch was so gentle it couldn't have hurt a child, but it sent a clear message. "I could have hurt you there, but I chose not to." Marcus spun around, his face flushed with exertion and growing panic. "What are you playing at? Fight back." "I am fighting," Sarah said quietly. "I'm just choosing how." The profundity of her statement hung in the air. She wasn't running or cowering. She was demonstrating a level of control that none of them had ever seen before. Marcus, his breath coming in ragged gasps, made one final desperate attempt. He dropped low and lunged forward, trying to clinch and use his weight advantage to overwhelm her. It was exactly the wrong move against exactly the wrong person. As Marcus lunged forward, Sarah did something that defied everything the watching crowd thought they understood about boxing and physics. She didn't try to back away or defend against the clinch. Instead, she stepped forward into it. Her movement was so unexpected, so perfectly timed, that Marcus's forward momentum worked against him. Sarah's hands found his shoulders, and using a technique that looked almost gentle, she guided his energy downward and to the side while stepping away. Marcus crashed to the canvas with a resounding thud that echoed through the silent gym. The room erupted in gasps and shocked whispers. Marcus lay still for a moment, stunned not just by the impact, but by the complete impossibility of what had just happened. He'd been the aggressor. He'd had all the momentum, and somehow he'd ended up on the canvas while his opponent stood calmly above him, not even breathing hard. Marcus pushed himself up on his elbows, staring at Sarah with a mixture of confusion and dawning respect. "How did you do that?" Sarah extended her hand to help him up. 15 years of practice before I ever stepped away from the ring." Marcus ignored the offered hand and scrambled to his feet on his own, his face burning with embarrassment and wounded pride. Around the room, his fighters watched with wide eyes, seeing their seemingly invincible coach reduced to a confused, humbled man. "That's impossible," Marcus muttered. You're just a mom, a regular person." "No," Sarah said gently but firmly. "I'm a person who chose to step away from boxing to focus on what really mattered, raising my son. But that doesn't mean I forgot everything I learned." The truth hit the room like a wave. This wasn't some lucky amateur who'd gotten in a few good moves. This was someone who operated on a completely different level. Someone who'd been holding back so dramatically that the entire confrontation had been less a fight than a lesson. Danny stepped forward, his eyes bright with tears of pride and relief. "Mom was Sarah Rodriguez," he announced to the stunned room. "Two-time professional champion. She retired when I was little." The silence that followed was deafening. Several of the older fighters pulled out their phones, clearly searching for the name. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to awe as they found videos and articles about Sarah's legendary career. Marcus's face went through a series of emotions: shock, embarrassment, and finally, something that might have been the beginning of wisdom. He looked around at his fighters, then back at Sarah. I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "And I owe them one too." He gestured toward his fighters. "This wasn't teaching. This was bullying." Sarah nodded. "The strongest thing you can do is admit when you're wrong. Your fighters will respect you more for it, not less." Marcus straightened his shoulders and turned to face his class. "Everyone, I made a serious mistake today. I let my ego make decisions that my brain should have made. Mrs. Martinez showed me what real boxing looks like. Not just the techniques, but the wisdom to know when and how to use them." The gym remained silent as the weight of the lesson settled over everyone present. Sarah gathered her jacket and moved toward Danny, who looked at her with newfound respect and understanding. As they prepared to leave, Marcus called out softly, "Mrs. Martinez?" She turned back to him. "Thank you," he said simply, "for showing me what real strength looks like." Sarah smiled gently. "Real strength is what you do next, Coach Rivera. How you choose to lead from here." As mother and son walked toward the exit, the gym slowly began to buzz with quiet conversation. The fighters looked at their coach with new eyes, seeing someone who'd been humbled but not broken, educated rather than defeated. Marcus stood in the center of the ring, looking around at faces that held not mockery, but respect for his willingness to learn. For the first time in years, he felt like he might actually become the teacher his fighters deserved.